Okay, well, it's just about a couple minutes after 12, and I think we'll get going here. Just wanted to thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. My name is Tom Banke, and I work with Forward Community Investments, and we're excited to have you join us for today's presentation. Before we get going, I'd like to take this opportunity to share some background on how we got here today. Forward Community Investments is celebrating their 20-year anniversary in 2014. Actually, we have a celebration tomorrow morning to celebrate this. FCI transforms Wisconsin communities by supporting organizations and programs that reduce racial, social, and economic disparities. We have strengthened these communities by offering affordable, flexible loans and expert advisory services that allow organizations to grow sustainably. Our loans, advisory services, and recently added grant funds give FCI the tools to encourage and support initiatives that make positive change possible. Organizations need resources of all kinds, along with the skills and tools to manage them. Technology, volunteers, strong board governance, and financial acumen can provide some answers, but an important first step is to identify your assets and needs. Then, you'll need to determine what works best for you and what you can do to work better. We can help you to figure these out, figure out where you stand and how we can get to where you want to go. With the help of BMO Harris Bank, we are able to offer this series of webinars to build nonprofit effectiveness. BMO Harris Bank is an active partner in Wisconsin communities and demonstrates the strong citizenship as an important part of whom they are and how they approach the community. Volunteerism and corporate responsibility are key parts to the culture at BMO Harris Bank. It's how they demonstrate their commitment to and invest in the communities they serve. Well, right now, we'd like to take this opportunity to kind of do some housekeeping for those who are unfamiliar with the GoToWebinar software. You can join the webinar by using the telephone number provided in your confirmation email that was sent directly from GoToWebinar, or you can use your computer speakers, which is recommended by GoToWebinar. Regarding questions throughout the webinar, we want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible, so we'll be taking questions throughout the webinar. You can submit them by using the chat or questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll also be doing some polls throughout the presentation to increase some participation. So right now, we'd like to launch the first poll here, which is asking, what is the role in your organization? So I will launch that right now, and we'll be able to see where everybody is coming from here. So as these are rolling in, feel free to answer and take your time. We're looking at about anywhere between 36 and 35% executive directors, probably 40% staff, 13% other. So quite a good mix of I think that would be the best way to put it. Then next you can use the chat feature to also answer questions. We'd like you to use that right now on the right-hand side of your screen and enter the name of your organization. Great. Well, as we'll move on, I'd like to begin today's presentation with introducing a little bit about the webinar itself. Collective impact occurs when organizations from different sectors agree to align their efforts in solving a specific social problem using a common agenda and common measures of success. Mike Soika, who will be presenting today's webinar from Milwaukee Succeeds, will discuss the collaborative effort undertaken in the summer of 2011 by the Greater Milwaukee Foundation, Greater Milwaukee Community, the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, Milwaukee Association of Milwaukee Urban League, the United Way of Greater Milwaukee, and the Helen Bader Foundation to unite the community around a common goal, lasting change in the way of education that works for the children of Milwaukee. Mike is a longtime advocate for social justice and has spent his entire career dedicated to promoting positive change. He has worked with groups across a wide variety of fields, including education, advocacy, economic development, health, social services, and youth development. Well, at this time, I'd like to hand the reins over to Mike so he can begin with his presentation, and I think we'll just go from there. And
okay, well, thank you, Tom.
yeah. Okay, Mike, and I believe you should have control right now.
Okay.
If you want to just click, if you just want to click the Show My Screen function, there you go. Excellent.
Okay. Well, I want to welcome everybody. What you have in front of you is an overview of what we'd like to accomplish today. I encourage you to ask questions throughout and not wait for the periods where we have formal Q&A teed up on the slide. So if you have questions, ask them. I'll do the best I can to answer. Whoops. Okay. Let's hope this works. Here we go. What we're going to cover today is do a general overview of Milwaukee Succeeds. It's very short, just to kind of give you the broad brush of who we are. The second component is to look at what makes a successful collective impact organization. Third piece is to talk specifically at a very high level about collective impact, and then to leave some time for questions and answers. But again, if we could do the questions throughout, I think everybody will get more out of the presentation. So we'll start in talking about Milwaukee Succeeds. Our mission is actually to ensure success for every child in every school, cradle to career. That every child, every school, cradle to career is critical, especially in Milwaukee, where the competition around students is pretty fierce as it relates to choice, charter, and public schools. We're one of the few organizations that says that these are all our kids, and we're concerned about the success of all of them. And the other key component is cradle to career. What we really try to do is to close the achievement gap for the children from cradle to career. And I kind of like this slide. Every time I put it up, I get giggles. People think that it was written about Milwaukee, but it was actually out of Albuquerque that this was originally done. It talks about the finger pointing around education, but I think that there's finger pointing in every sector around every issue, and it's apropos for just about anything people are working on. And if you're involved in the community, you've heard these conversations where somebody downstream says, but if you did your job, my job would be easier. And what we talk about is that we need to be cradle to career. In fact, there is a study that was just put out by the Brookings Institute that talked about if you impact a child's life at strategic moments throughout his or her career, your impact on their life and their ability to move beyond where they are is significantly enhanced. So it's versus a one-shot address one issue in their life, if you can address the issues as they grow through the continuum, your likelihood of success is much better. So that's what we think makes for success. And it's a community that comes together, that is fiercely focused on collaboration. In Milwaukee Succeeds, we literally have hundreds. We're approaching over 300 organizations that are working with us on nearly a day-to-day basis to close the achievement gap for all kids. And these groups come from the very fabric of our community in every sector. Every sector you can think of that's active in education, they're involved with us in some way or another. As I said, we're working to close the achievement gap. And how do we do this? On a broad measure, it's we measure what matters. We're a data-driven organization. We identify and promote best practices. That's a lot of what we do in our network process. And we align resources to support what works. And that's a critical aspect of collective impact is figure out what works by measuring it and then you make sure that the resources are there to support it. We talk about closing the achievement gap in Milwaukee, and it's very real. Many people are surprised when I say to them that students in Milwaukee outperform their peers in the state, in the nation, as it relates to critical ACT scores. And they're almost on par with their state peers for critical ACT scores. And as I said, most people don't believe that. But it's true if you talk about white students. White students in the city of Milwaukee, 36% of white students in the city of Milwaukee are proficient in all 4 sectors of the ACT bank of tests, compared to 26% across the nation and 39% in the state. But if you look at if you disaggregate the data in Milwaukee, as I said, 36% of the white students are proficient in all 4 ACT tests, but less than 3% of students of color are proficient in all 4 ACT boundary tests. So achievement gap is pretty significant, but it's not only in education. The state of Wisconsin spends about $120 million a year on child care subsidies in Milwaukee, but yet only 10% of the children who are in subsidized daycare are in high-quality daycare. We know that students who can read by 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to graduate high school. The converse of that is if you're low income and you can't read by 3rd grade, you're 13 times more likely to drop out of high school. Only 15% of students in Milwaukee are proficient in reading by 3rd grade. We talked about ACT scores. We know it can predict performance in college, but yet these are the numbers that we're seeing. And we also know that by the year 2020, across Wisconsin, 61% of all jobs will require post-secondary education or training, but yet only 35% of adults have an associate degree or more in Milwaukee. So we are concerned about that achievement gap across the broad spectrum of issues. Question is, how do we address that? Very simply put, we unite groups around a single purpose. As I said, we are cradle to career. We have nearly 300 groups working with us, working in school readiness, making sure kids are ready for kindergarten, in K-12, making sure that they succeed there. After they graduate, moving on to college or career, and then making sure that they're healthy and supported socially and emotionally. We are concerned about the achievement gap from cradle to career, and we work on that diligently. And I want to emphasize, if I haven't already, cradle to career is a key component of what makes for successful strategies around closing the gap. So that very clearly, in a high overview, is where Milwaukee Succeeds is. And, the next section will talk about the critical components of successful collective impact. Are there any questions right now?
No, Mike, we haven't received really many, just more or less around the flow of the webinar and things like that. I just would like to interject. This presentation will be made available, the one that Mike is sharing with us right now. It will be available on our website as well as the recording of the webinar, so you can feel free to pass that along. So carry on, Mike.
Okay, great. Well, now we'll get into the critical components. And we'll do that by talking about what Milwaukee Succeeds, how we're made up, how we came to being, and who we are. We're 3 years old. We are housed within an anchor organization. That's a term that's used by the collective impact organizations across the United States. Our anchor organization is the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. What that means to us is that we're not a 501c3. We are embedded in the foundation. We don't pay rent. We don't pay for any back office. We live and breathe within their systems. All right? We only have 3.5 staff that we pay. Myself, a network coordinator, a data person, and administrative staff. Our budget's $450,000, of which $100,000 is set aside to help our networks prove the strategies that they're working on. We have 10 networks, and that's where the bulk of the groups are that work with us. We have a very large and sprawling structure, and we'll get into that later. We have actually a 45-member leadership council, 15 members executive committee. That's who we are on the books, but there are parts of us that are off the books, so to say. We have 5 part-time staff that are loaned to us, and loaned to us from organizations like United Way, the Greater Milwaukee Committee, the Helen Bader Foundation, GE Healthcare, to give you a sense of some of that.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
We've got some questions rolling in, and I just want to make sure that we capture them. They seem a little timely asked questions. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask you those right now just so we don't lose those questions throughout the webinar.
Sure.
One of the questions was, when you had mentioned there are 10 networks, what do you mean by networks? Could you go and elaborate that a little bit more?
I will. All right, if you remember the previous slide that talked about how we bring groups together to work on a single purpose, and that's what the networks are. For example, one of our goals is making sure that kids are ready for school before they start kindergarten. That's our goal. We have a staff loaned to us through United Way that works on that goal, and that staff person has organized 4 networks. And the networks are organized around specific items. One is on increasing the number of kids who are able to attend a high-quality child care. Right? Another one is increasing immunization rates in the city of Milwaukee. A third one is looking at the social and emotional growth of children aged 0 to 5. And I'm drawing a blank on the 4th one, but believe me, it is there. So, and what we do is we bring together groups around those issues. Let me give you an example, and it will kind of set itself as an allegory for going forward of how we operate. We brought a lot of the nonprofit daycare providers to the table to talk about how can we improve the number of kids who are attending high-quality daycare. And they pretty much said to us, you know what, we don't need you. We can go, we've been doing this for 20 years. We are the experts. We'll go off in a room and we'll create a strategy that we know is what we need. And all we need you to do is to help us promote that strategy to your leadership. And we said, you know what, I'm sure that you've been in this for 20 years. I'm sure you know what you're doing. But we need you to go through our network process, our continuous improvement, the MAIC process, because what we do with that is that we help groups to look at not only what they do as an organization, but how their organization sits and reacts to the broad system that they're working in. So we're looking for a systemic change, not organizational change. And so they reluctantly did that. And we have very specific measures that the networks have to go through. They have to create a feasibility plan. They have to create an action plan. They have to implement on the action plan. They have to share data around that. So this group came in at the feasibility plan, and we asked them, how's it going? And they said something that just reaffirmed my commitment to this process. And they said, you know what, you were right. We thought that what we needed was just more money to improve the educational outcomes of our daycare workers so that we can improve the quality of care that we give. So, and that's what we thought we needed. We certainly need that, but through this process they identified another need. And what they identified was that nowhere in the city of Milwaukee is there a unified way to measure the social and emotional growth of children aged 0 to 5 years old. And wouldn't it be important that we would, if we could measure that growth on an ongoing basis, identify areas where kids might be in need, intervene at an appropriate time when we have to, and share that data across systems. So now what this network is looking at is, can we involve pediatric clinics, can we involve daycare centers, and can we involve in-home visitation programs all around identifying the social emotional growth of kids in Milwaukee using a unified measurement tool, and then can we integrate the interventions amongst all those organizations. So what a network does it's a group of like individuals working on the same thing. They identify a single thing that they want to work on, and we help them work on it. So that's the networks. Part of what makes the network successful in my mind are these Six Sigma Black Belt volunteers that we talk about here. As I mentioned, we go through a DMAIC continuous improvement process. We couldn't do that without experts helping us. And at this point, I tell the one joke that I think I know, and it's how many of you have been in a church basement meeting where someone figured out that if they talked the longest and the loudest, they could get what they needed, right? Or at any meeting. And if they could just filibuster the meeting and talk over people, that they could win the day, right? They could wear people down. What we have with these coaches are trained professionals who are trained not only in tools, facilitation tools, but also in decision-making tools. And these coaches allow us to walk through a process that lifts up the voice of quiet people in the room and quells down the voice of the loud people in the room to make sure that we garner the wisdom of the collective organization at the table, and not just some groups that are there thinking that if they can promote their program, they'll win the prize. We have significant in-kind corporate support, and as I mentioned repeatedly, we have a significant number of groups involved. I've talked about the goals that we have. This gives you a sense of what they are. I want you to look a little bit about the measures. We'll talk about the measures and how we got to them a little bit later on in the presentation. I want to get to this. This is our accountability structure. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, that's the executive committee. That's 15 members. And the executive committee is a virtual who's who of decision makers in the city of Milwaukee. I don't say that to brag. I say that because we did that intentionally, because we knew that if the networks were doing their job and they were looking at systemic issues, that they would run into issues that they just could not solve on their own. And they would need a power structure or decision makers that could open doors and break down barriers. And so that's who's on the executive committee. It's the mayor of the city of Milwaukee. It's the head of the Milwaukee Public Schools. It's the head of the major foundation. It's the head of the Urban League. It's the Association of Commerce, the Greater Milwaukee Committee. You kind of get the flavor of who's there, right? If you look over to the right, it's the Community Leadership Council. Everybody on the executive committee is on the Leadership Council, plus another 30 organizations. So we have about 45 organizations on the Leadership Council. And there you have people like Tony Evers, who's the state superintendent of public schools, Howard Fuller, who's has been an advocate for public schools for generations here. We have the presidents or chancellors of the colleges and universities in the city sitting on that Leadership Council. And the purpose of the Leadership Council is, again, to create a broad voice in the community for the change that we know is coming. And then the operations team, what we asked on that, the operations team is really the organizations, the people that apply the oil to the cogs to make sure that they keep turning and turning in the right direction. An example of who's on that team, John Schliske, the head of Northwestern Mutual, is one of our co-chairs. He's on the executive committee. He appoints the president of his Northwestern Mutual Foundation on the operations team. Mike Lovell is the president of Marquette University. He appoints his dean of education on the operations committee. And you get the sense of who's there. We've asked for their people who are used to making the organization run. We asked for them to be on the operations team, because the operations team that holds the networks to fidelity to our operating model, and it's that group that identifies issues and solves them, and and raises issues to the level of the executive committee if it needs to be raised there. And I think this is what you wanted to hear. How do we get started? What does that mean? in some of the nuts and bolts of the components, all right? I talked about the anchor organization being the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And the importance of that is that the Greater Milwaukee Foundation started Milwaukee Succeeds. We have a new president who came here. Actually, she was working in Cincinnati before she came here. Cincinnati is home to Strive. Strive is the national model that we are replicating here in Milwaukee. She came here, looked at the education issues, and said, "Oh, we could use a Strive-like model here," and talked to her board about creating that. The board said, "Yes, that makes a lot of sense." So her name's Ellen Gilligan. Ellen brought in those founding partners that we talked about at the beginning: the Urban League, the Association of Commerce, the Bader Foundation, the United Way, etc. Said, can we go out and start talking to the broader community about creating a broad-based organization that can address the significant education issues in the city of Milwaukee? I wasn't involved in that part of the process, but what I'm told repeatedly by many people is this was not a hard sell. You know, they identified a list of the folks who they wanted on the Leadership Council, and they divvied up the list and went out and talked to them, and not one person turned them down. Right? Everybody raised their hand. The other important, what that was is we brought the key decision makers to the table, and I want you to keep that in mind because I think it was a critical part of the success we've had so far. The second part is a funding commitment. Went out and raised $1.8 million over a 5-year period to ensure that Milwaukee Succeeds could focus on the work and not need to focus on raising money. And that did two things. A, it allowed them to create some momentum, but it also created quite a signal to the community. And if you think about the community, in any community, people are skeptical. There have been these coalitions and these large-scale efforts that come and go. People tend to sometimes be cynical and think that I can wait them out. Right? Those first two bullet items made Milwaukee Succeed a little bit different in the making. A, we had the key decision makers at the table, and B, we had long-term significant funding that said to people, this group is not going away. Maybe I need to pay attention to them. The third thing that was valuable to us was guidance from Strive. Strive spun off a national consulting firm. We used them extensively in the early stages, so extensively that before executive committee meetings, we would send them our PowerPoint presentations to just kind of look at them and tell us, did that make sense? Strive helped us to create the foundations of our organization. It was on their advice that we created the accountability chart that you saw. It was on their advice that we built that operations team, and they helped us walk through what could have been landmines. So they were instrumental in our startup. I talked a lot about the inclusive table. And then what I want to talk about is the mission, vision, goals, and how we use the development of that to help build our organization. And
hey, Mike?
Yeah.
I have one quick question that came in that I think is kind of timely. Where or when do the community at large / parents have a voice in this?
It's a question we're asked a lot. Is what's the voice of parents in Milwaukee Succeeds? And I'm very proud of the fact that everyone, not everyone, that in each of our goal areas we have parent involvement as a critical component. One thing to look at is, again, we have nearly 300 organizations who are involved with us. Many of those organizations have deep roots in the community, and we hear the voice of the parents through them. But we also work with parents directly. One, in our third grade reading, we look at 3 areas. One is how do we help students, how do we help teachers, and how do we help parents? And when we were in the how do we help parents, we talked to parents. And what we heard, not necessarily directly, but what we heard is that I want to do everything I can to help my child to read. What can I do? And what we started looking at was putting together parent workshops to do tips and tricks on how to help your child read. And we have a great video, and I'll load it up onto our website. And it's the videos of a mom who attended one of the workshops saying, you know, I'm pleased, I'm helping my baby to read. And how I'm doing that is I've got these blue sticky notes. And blue begins with the letter B. So anything in my house that begins with the letter B, I put these blue sticky notes on. That's one of the strategies we were teaching in our parent workshop. And so we involved the input of parents in that way as well. We interviewed the parents immediately after the workshops, and then we interviewed them 6 weeks later to see are they implementing some of the tools, and could they tell us which tools they're implementing. So that was kind of a long way around, but the short answer is A, all of our groups, or many of our groups, have direct parent input into what they're doing, and we hear through them. B, we work directly on parent engagement. We have a parent engagement component in our school readiness, a parent engagement component in our third grade reading. Not directly related to parents, but we also have kicked off a large network around social emotional learning. And one of the things we did early on is we interviewed a bunch of teenagers across the city to understand from their perspective what creates stress in their lives and what would they like to see to help alleviate that stress. So one of the other things that we do, and as part of the discipline of the DMAIC process, is to identify the voice of the customer. So in each of our network strategies, when they come to the operations team with either their, we call them charter, but that's the feasibility plan or the action plan, we ask them how they got the voice of the customer integrated into their strategy. So I hope that answers the question.
Great, thanks, Mike.
Okay. I want to go back to this and talk a little about how we got there. We talked about our leadership council. When Milwaukee Succeeds was forming, we needed to identify what our mission, vision, values were. And quite honest, it wasn't hard to get there. You know, the all kids, all schools made a lot of sense to a lot of people. The goals that you see here, all children are prepared to enter school when they start kindergarten, that when they're in school they succeed and graduate. After they graduate, they move on to college and career, and that they're supported, are healthy and supported socially and emotionally. Those are fairly easy. The next part is, and as part of our culture, is measuring what matters. How do you get at those measures that make sense? And what we did is we set a set of criteria around measurements that made sense to us. Are there items that go across choice, charter, and MPS? Are there items, are the measurements something that we can easily get? Is it from a credible source? Is it relatively inexpensive so that we're not spending an inordinate amount of money every year just to collect the data? Then we went to our leadership council and said, okay, we want to create measures around goal 1. Who are the key players that we need to bring to the table around goal 1? And then they gave us that list. Then we brought those folks together and we started to talk to them about what is the criteria that we need to be creating measures around, and what are the measures we could use. That immunization one's an interesting example of the thought process at that time. What the group was really looking for was how can you measure parental involvement? Given our criteria, there was no way that we had could identify a measure to do that. So then somebody came up with the idea of saying, well, if not measuring parental involvement, if the children have a medical home, could that be a proxy for parental involvement? And we looked at that and said, well, that's a good idea, but there's no way to measure whether or not families or children have a medical home. What else could we look at? And then we landed on immunization in that vein, saying immunization, if kids are immunized on time, could be a proxy for how involved parents are in the lives of their kids. It gives you a sense of how we got there. All right. I'm going to take a break here and ask for questions and see if there's anything you want me to delve more into.
No, Mike, I think nothing really that we wanted to delve into really. I think if we just keep going, and then I'm sure we'll get some, we do have some questions, but I think we'll wait till the end when you're completed.
Okay. We're going to talk about collective impact now and just in general what it is. This is just a theory of systems change that we use. There's the delta of change just in case. And there's three key components of change. One is you've got to have the data, right? You have to be data informed. The second one is, what's the process, what's the program, how are you going to affect the change? But the third one, and the critical one, is political will. And what we try to do is we try to build our organization based around this understanding of systems change. We are proud of the fact that we are data driven. We look for best practices in the processes and programs. In fact, one of the things that we ask our networks to do is to do a process map to make sure that we're looking at systemic change as it relates. And then the third piece is political will. That's again why we collected the leadership table that we did, and it's why that's what we tell the networks, is that their job is to identify the systems change. It's the organization's job to help them achieve that change. This is the STRIVE model of collective impact, the key pillars. Shared community vision. What does that mean? It means that you can agree on what the mission is. For us, it's success for every child in every school, cradle to career. Common agenda. And this becomes critical, in the broad context, at the organizational level, but it also becomes critical at the network level, especially the common agenda. The networks have a tendency to want to, at the beginning, all the groups, maybe not all, but a large number of the groups come to the table thinking that this is my opportunity to promote my program so that I can get more money to run it. And what we drive home through the network process, through the collaborative, the black belt coaches, through our own staff, through our leadership, is it's not about programs, it's about practices, it's not about you, it's about a systemic change, it's a common agenda. Next pillar is evidence-based decision making. We are hard on that. We want to make sure that it's data-driving decisions, and as I said before, not people who are arguing or have the most stamina at the meeting. An amusing example of this is we were at a meeting a while ago, and this one organization says, I've got the data that proves that my program works. And he held up a report and pointed to a page and said, if you look at this page right here, it says that the data proves my program works. And I said, great. Can I have a copy of that report? And the person said, well, no. And I thought, okay, that's kind of odd. And of course, we were able to get a copy of the report and other means. And what we found was on that particular page, it did in fact say this particular organization created some change that had a significant impact on the lives of the families they were serving. But it also said on pages before and after that, but the impact on other areas of the organization, not so much. Right? Our black belt coaches are guardians of data based decision making, and we are thankful for that, and we want to make sure that that's one of the criteria we use for everything that we do. What it does is it takes the emotion and the politics out as much as you can. Collaborative action, this mutually reinforcing activity, is something that people stumble over. It's not, once you understand the example, it makes a lot of sense. In our goal 4, our network is looking at how do you promote social emotional learning. And we're looking at a model out of a group out of Chicago. And that model says that if you can, if children are self-aware, if they can self-manage, if they're socially aware, if they understand relationships and they make good decisions, then they'll be better prepared for school and better prepared for life. Right? And what this network is looking at is saying, you know, my organization does a great job on decision making. I'm not so much interested on helping kids be self-aware. So if I just make sure that the organization that I'm working with in the network that is good at helping kids be self-aware, if I could just cross-promote helping my kids to go to their programs and they help their kids come to my programs, we'll get what we want, so that I don't have to build curriculum around all 5 aspects of social emotional learning. I just have to stay in my lane, do what I do well, and make sure that other people are doing the same and that the kids are getting exposure across the board. That's mutually reinforcing activities, right? And then all groups align around common metrics. Right? Again, looking at that goal 4 organization and those 5 criteria, they said, okay, we need a common language around what that means. What does it mean to be self-aware? What does it mean to be self-management? Let's identify what that means. How do you measure that? And how do we agree together as an organization that we're going to measure that? And then how do we hold ourselves accountable for reporting out on that measures as we work together? And then investment in sustainability. I talked a bit previously about the long-term viability and the importance of that. But then I didn't talk so much about the aligning resources to support best practices. One of our networks is working on tutoring. We found that if you identify the specific reading need of a child and you can train volunteers to meet that need, volunteer tutors to meet that need, then that child's reading growth rate accelerates 2.5 times greater than children who don't receive that kind of tutoring. And what we're saying now is that we've tested this. We know that this kind of tutoring works. We know that the vast majority, 85% of our kids, are not reading on par. And how can we accelerate that style of reading? And what we're doing is in a couple of ways. One is we're promoting that best practice to foundations, saying, if you're funding tutoring, this is what we found to work. You might want to look at that and ask your organizations, is that how you are addressing the tutoring need? 2 is, can our organizations able to retool? There's a group in town, RSVP, it's Retired Senior Volunteers. They are in dozens upon dozens of MPS schools helping to do tutoring and reading. And now they've been a part of our network, and what they're saying is now we can begin to train our tutors on that specific tutoring model, and that when they're in the schools they can begin to implement that. So can we retool existing resources? And then the third piece that we're looking at is how do we bring in more resources to expand the pool of groups able to do that kind of tutoring. And there's a program in Minnesota we're looking at replicating here. It's called Minnesota Reading Corps. Right now, the Minnesota Reading Corps is tutoring 30,000 children in 700 schools across Minnesota, and the results are stunning. And we're looking at how we can then raise the money to bring that group here. So aligning resources to support best practices is a critical part of who we are. And I was really proud of our leadership. Our 3rd grade reading networks came to the leadership and said, okay, these are the strategies that we've found to work. And our leadership was very clear, and they said to us quietly and publicly, A, we trust the networks. It's our job to trust the networks and trust the idea that they've vetted what they're bringing to us, and that the staff has made sure that what strategies they've followed are strategies that make sense. It's not our job to second guess the strategies. It is our job to identify the resources to expand those strategies so that we can get the kind of systemic change that we want. And they said that quietly behind closed doors, and they said that publicly at our Leadership Council meeting, is that it's our job to align the resources to fund the best practices in as broadly capacity as we can. And I was proud of them for that, and I was even more proud in that they said it without prompting. You've seen this again, from individual action to collaborative action. Most groups operate around the individual action, and I'm not denigrating that at all. In fact, it's in the individual action that you see a lot of creativity. But it's not going to get you the systemic change that you need, right? And that would be like groups saying, I want to improve education. Coordinated action is the next level up, and many groups work here. Many groups are now talking about their coordinated action being collective impact. It's not. An example of coordinated action might be, I'm doing a education seminar for parents who are getting ready to do FOSFA reports to look at scholarships for children. I can take 15 more parents. If your organization wants to help promote that and you have 15 parents, welcome in. That's kind of coordinative action. Okay? Collaborative action is the kind of stuff we've been talking about. 75 groups are working to improve third grade reading by focusing on tutoring, teacher training, and parent engagement. That's a different kind of animal. We have a common agenda. We identify the metrics we're going to use to measure success, and then we drive collectively together to the strategy. I just threw this in because I love it. It's a great, I wish I had done it. I didn't. This was done by the Association of Commerce, and it's just a way to talk about collective impact. What you have are all these groups on the outside working individually around education. We brought them together and helped them to focus on third grade reading. That's a great visual of collective impact. And that is the end of the presentation. We're open for questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. We do have a few questions that we're rolling in throughout the webinar. Let's see here. One of them is, can you speak about the creation of Milwaukee Secedes before it had its name? When the idea was really raw? Can you speak a little bit about like kind of the beginning stages of that?
Yeah, again, Ellen Gilligan is the CEO of the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. Before she came here, she worked at the Community Foundation in Cincinnati. She came here, and they brought her in to be a change agent on how the foundation works. Right? She came in and looked at education and said, my goodness, it is a critical issue in Milwaukee. Brought together a couple of people, really. It was someone from the GMC, someone from the Association of Commerce, the United Way, and started talking about, can we unite as a community around education? And then brought in Jeff Edmondson, who is the lead staff at Stride in Cincinnati, had him talk to those key organizations about what the experience in Cincinnati was, what the outcomes that they've been able to see. By the way, I forget how many measures Cincinnati is tracking, but 85% of the measures they're tracking are moving in a positive direction, which I think is pretty astounding. So we brought the resident expert in Cincinnati in to talk to the groups. Got a commitment from those founding organizations that yes, this is something we want to do, and then worked with Stride to say, okay, what are the next steps? The next step is let's identify the leaders in the community who absolutely have to be at the table, and how are we going to get them to the table? Who are the best people for them to talk to? If it's not you, Ellen, is it maybe you, Mary Lou from United Way? If it's not either of them, is it maybe you, Tim from the Association of Commerce? And just started rolling through the list and building that way. And again, we relied on Strive pretty heavily in building the infrastructure that we use to operate the organization. Hope that answers.
Great, thanks. Sure. Another one that we received throughout was how challenging was it to get early buy-in for this and come together and work together? Could you describe that a little bit, please?
Yeah, it was not challenging to get early buy-in at the high level. As I said, not one person turned down the request to sit on the Leadership Council. And did we get the early buy-in? Did we get welcome early buy-in from the networks, the grassroots organizations? And I would be a fool to say that I don't recognize the fact that the major funders in education in this community are the founding partners of Milwaukee Succeeds. And I think that that was something that was not lost on a lot of the organizations. And they have said, okay, I kind of get where this is going. Maybe I need to jump on the train. The Greater Milwaukee Foundation made a decision that early on that drove a lot of people to our table, but it drove a lot of crabby people to our table. They said that they are going to suspend funding in education until Milwaukee Succeeds identifies strategies that can be funded, and then just stopped funding education altogether for a while. And that was a pretty clear signal to folks that they need to be involved, but they kind of came to the table with, okay, you took my money, I'm here, show me, kind of thing. And I think we've won them over, but it's not been easy. I think that, again, that's why I emphasize the idea of this large, powerful, visible decision-making body and the long-term funding commitment. Is that the tendency in most communities is, oh, been there, done that, we've seen these things come and go, and we'll just wait them out. And having those two things plus the major funders at the table saying this is important to us really brought people to the table. And then it was our job to keep them there, and I'm happy to say we did. And I think part of the reason we did is because we showed them something different in this DMAIC continuous improvement process that we asked them to go through.
Great, thank you, Mike. One other one. How would you contrast your work to an out-of-school time network?
How would I contrast to an out-of-school time network?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's an out-of-school time network that's being developed here in Milwaukee. It's called Beyond the Bell. We've talked to them about how we don't want to duplicate efforts, right? And that's being led by a fellow named Reggie Moore, a very talented individual in the city. And Reggie actually came up with a great way to explain the differences. And what he said is that Beyond the Bell is an organization that helps groups get better. How do we define quality? How do we measure success? And that Milwaukee Succeeds is an organization that looks for the strategic vision. And in his way, he was saying, Milwaukee Succeeds says we want to go from Milwaukee to San Francisco, and here's the route we're going to take, here's the map. And Beyond the Bell is gets the car, makes sure it's ready to go, gets everybody on the car, and drives. Right? So that's kind of how we've looked at working together. The other thing is that we've got a lot of out-of-school time organizations involved with us, both in our third grade reading networks and also in our Goal 4 networks, the social emotional learning one.
Great, thanks, Mike. Well, we're still waiting for a few more to come through, but we are getting close to that time, and to the closing, and we do want to be respectful of everybody's time for those that they've allotted for this. Ben, was there anything that you had seen?
One question, Mike, that I think is a common theme is how do we apply this in our community? And I think there's a couple themes in those types of questions that we're seeing. One is around, if it's a smaller scale, how would we start? And so that you talk about bringing that broad group, but if your size or scale is smaller, you decrease that size of that council, or how would you recommend kind of starting that off? And I think embedded in that was, when do we make that real ask to those community leaders? Like, how much pre-planning was there before that?
Yeah, well, the pre-planning question's a very good one. I think in terms of the scale, you just have to assess what's the relative size and appetite of your community. I think many nonprofits, especially the ones who are involved in sophisticated fundraising, have rather large advisory groups that they bring to the table, so it's not an alien concept to a lot of organizations that way. When do you bring the decision makers to the table? I think that you have to have a good feasibility plan. You need to know where you want to go. You need to know what you're asking them to sign on to. You have to have a pretty good case statement already developed, I think. So a fair amount of pre-planning should be done before you go out and bring them together. And what happened here in Milwaukee, we had the advantage of someone having lived in Cincinnati and lived through it, so they could translate the language here. But again, had to have a business plan on what that meant. Is that, yes, we want to have a leadership team. Yes, we need to have a ongoing funding. Yes, we'll house it in the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. This is it's going to be focused on education. This is it's going to be cradle to career. A lot of that was in the early development of the organization, and I think that other organizations that are thinking about doing this need to think it through, because the last thing you want to do is go to a business leader and say, we want you to be on board, and the business leader says, great. What do you want me to do? What's the length of the commitment? What are you asking? And you say, well, we'll get back to you. We're developing that. A good example is when they went to John Schliske from Northwestern Mutual. Timing was perfect, because John was just appointed head of Northwestern Mutual. Northwestern Mutual in the city of Milwaukee is a big player as it relates to not only employment and business, but also in terms of foundation giving and education. And Schliske said, you're coming to me exactly the right moment. I'm trying to decide for my own organization, do we go deep into neighborhoods or schools, or do we go broad across systems change? And the group from Milwaukee Succeeds was able to say, well, if you're interested in systems change, this is what we are trying to do. This is what the organization looks like as it relates to that systems change. Here's what they did in Cincinnati. Here's what we're trying to do in Milwaukee. If you decide around systems change here, then this might be the thing for you. And that's really what sold him, is that the vision that was already laid out.
Thank you, Mike. And I think that's a great point to end on, is really just having that vision for what needs to happen. And I think using this as a template, and as well as the work in Cincinnati and other networks across a wide variety of issues. We've seen it around health disparities. We've seen it around homelessness and poverty issues, health and wellness. And I think the tools and information here, just to recap for everyone, we'll be sending out a recording, as well as these slides, which have a lot of great information and ideas for where to start. There's also some website links we can include for more details. I know some people had some questions that popped up near the end. We'll try to answer those offline or connect them with you, Mike, if it was a specific question to your work with Milwaukee Success. Great, thank you.
Okay, well, please join me in thanking Mike for today's content, and BMO Harris Bank for their support. As Ben mentioned, the presentation was so valuable, and as with all our webinars, the recording will be made available for playback from our website as well as the presentation. We'll be sending out a follow-up message with the link to where you can access these materials to all attendees. And I would encourage all participants to review our website at forwardci.org for more information on how forward community investments might help your organization. Our next installment of the 2014 Virtual Leadership Series will be Doing More with More, Putting Shared Leadership into Practice with Michael Allison, Susan Misra, and Alyssa Perry on Tuesday, October 14th. You can register for this webinar and find out more information about it on our website. This information will also be included in that follow-up message that we alluded to. One final note, when you do close your browser from this session, you will be directed to a very concise questionnaire to evaluate today's webinar. We'd appreciate if you'd take a few minutes to complete to help us continue to improve the effectiveness of these offerings. Thanks again to BMO Harris Bank for making this exceptional learning opportunity available. Take care and enjoy the remainder of your day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you again, Mike.
Thank you.